My response to the debate between Aron, Ra, and Daniel Haqiqatjou. I think that the views of Daniel were pretty shocking. If you commit blasphemy, you can be killed. Now, I think that's a pretty sure sign of a form of cultism, wherein if you go enough against the grain, you ought to be removed. And he admitted to that, and he says it's for the preservation of the group. But no group ever in the whole world will adopt to your view, and if you have that kind of mindset, there will always be conflict, and that may be what we've seen in the Middle East, although that was also maybe fueled on by Russia and US interference. Furthermore, there's the argument that atheism would lead us to live in the pod and eat the bugs and have no sense of morality. And that's a straw man, I would say. It's not necessarily true, but it does have a point. If you don't have any kind of spiritual awareness, which doesn't have to come in the form of religion, but introspection, then logically a hedonistic worldview of life follows, which can quickly, I think, can become dystopic, and I do think that that's what we've seen to some degree. Politicians worshipping scientists who get paid to say lies and spread falsehoods, and we've seen plenty of that. COVID was about 10 to 50 times more dangerous than the Democrats actually thought. It was about as dangerous as the flu, albeit more infectious. And they've imposed insane lockdowns under the guise of scientific truth, and that you just have to take the vaccine even though it's not tested. And you can say that that's not pure science, but it is a kind of dogmatism also, a kind of religion also. If you don't believe in the things that the super smart scientists say, you are a dissident and you should be locked down and have you're not allowed to enter the restaurant and so on. So we've definitely seen that kind of immorality as well. Even now, recently in Canada, an association of psychiatrists had sent out to doctors that people who don't take the vaccine should be tested if they shouldn't, or recommended to take psychiatric medication because they don't want the untested vaccine. Now that should tell you something, I think. That kind of mindset that we're just right because we're the scientists, even though there's no strong science behind it, quite the opposite. Remember how you wouldn't be allowed to gather in groups outside? Well, there was actually a study that I knew of and tried to spread online in China, where they track and trace people and looked where the infections were, and one infection out of 7,200 occurred outside. The rest all occurred inside. So outside was always completely fine. So that kind of scientism, as we've had it, it may not be an ultimate truth or consistent truth, but as we've had it, leads to also a form of cultism, also a form of dogmatism, and suppression of morality by people who would like to remain in power. And I would argue the same that would happen in the Middle East, where maybe imams or Islam would suppress too much. But they also do have a point, in the sense that if you have a devoted prayer life, and I don't even believe in God, but I do believe in spirituality. If you have a devoted prayer life, a communal direction towards honesty, goodness, morality, and I'm not sure to what degree that is true of Islam. I know it's true to some degree in Christianity, but I don't know so much about Islam. I'd like to speak to speakers and maybe do an interview. But if you have that kind of consistent movement, and also one of introspection, that does lead to a kind of peace and a kind of acceptance of how things are. So if you'd have maybe a child that become autistic, you could look at that from a scientific point of view perhaps and see, well, this is a problem, this is a defect, it needs to be fixed, it needs to get all sorts of medication or something like that in order for it to become normal. But someone with a religious devotion point of view may say, no, this child is, it may be different, it may not be, and there are different degrees in this, of course, but it may not be as productive as it could be in terms of socio-economic value. But actually, we love it dearly, and it has a special place in our family, and it brings us a lot of joy and a lot of love. That can be a positive, way more wholesome experience because of that kind of mindset. And likewise, if you don't have any kind of introspection, and that can be pretty difficult, so having a culture or rituals or devoted time to go inwards or pray, like let's say open your heart to the universe, if that's done that way, can have tremendous positive effects. And in that sense, I agree with Daniel that, well, you can also have that from a kind of atheist point of view, like in a way in Buddhism. Though Buddhism also has a kind of view of God, but it's not so important. It's like there's something more, like peace is more important than any kind of spiritual state, the Buddhists would argue. Even though there may or may not be a God, it's not that important, because you, as emptiness, or as the light, also oneness with that kind of light, is also beyond the whole worldly realm. So God is for the worldly realm, so to speak. It does exist in Buddhism, but it's not that important. So you can have that in an atheistic kind of society as well. But I can understand that I would rather live in maybe a Christian nationalistic society or a Hindu nationalistic society, and I don't know enough about Islam to say if I would rather live in that. I don't think so, but I can see that kind of point of view, that the fear of losing that kind of introspective momentum or wholesomeness in your culture can outweigh the potential risk of having a culture that's somehow maybe falls into cultism without any kind of religion, which I do think we've kind of seen with Stalin and Hitler. So there seems to be that kind of fear that if you don't have that kind of people that say they devote themselves to a higher purpose or to a universal love, you more easily get people who get drunk on their own power, their own humanity, their own scientific power, and won't be afraid to abuse it. But obviously abuse can occur in either way, either societies. So the answer, as cheeky as it sounds, or as cheesy as it sounds, should be that to love, to put truth, the universal sense of oneness above our own greed and power, and that should be the answer. And yeah, if you don't have any kind of spirituality maybe, or devotion to, let's say, spirit, then I do think that can more easily lead to delusion and misuse of power. But not necessarily towards God, although you could call it that way, but simply the fact that within we are also empty, we're also empty space, and one with empty space, and also with the energy or the light. So if that gets recognized, it's much harder to hurt someone else, or to want to be special, because that light or that emptiness isn't personal. And it seems that religion may have kind of lost that sometimes, but I do think that is what it's about also. Although it knows about the human, tends to know about the human aspect in which that should manifest, as in love. We shouldn't be greedy and that kind of stuff. It tends to know that. But there's the inner experience, and sometimes it does know that there's like light within yourself, peace within yourself, that's like naturally fulfilling. So that's like a literal anti-corruption mechanism. So that would be my response. Both points of view are valid. And I personally simply resonate most with Buddhism, and kind of maybe a sense of Hinduism as well, which sees God as everyone, and oneness, and India and I think pretty much most Buddhist countries, they've never started a war, as far as I know. They may have had conflicts and whatnot, but for them to start a war, apparently it hasn't happened so much, as opposed to Christianity and Islam, which says that no, I'm not. They say this to a degree because Islam also recognizes Jesus as a prophet, but they do tend to say no. We have the right way, and you ought to join it, and that's how you get to heaven. But that's not true. The right way is the way of love, of oneness, living properly, and experiencing heaven that way, and oneness that way. You don't have to. Why would you have to go somewhere else? What? Yeah, I mean, there is a truth to that. The sense of total identification with a limited body-mind gives you stress, because it feels like you can die at any time, basically. So there is truth that you should transcend the body, but yeah, that would be my response. So I think both had a point, but humans have a tendency to want to be the right ones and exert power, and I don't think that is very healthy. Thank you.